The UK and the European Union resume talks today over trade issues for post-Brexit. Most parts of California have been put under lockdown as the number of COVID-19 cases surge across the United States. Plus, Ghanaians are voting today in presidential and parliamentary polls. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Akaite Afia here in Lagos. We began in the UK as Brexit talks continue with the European Union. Disputes over fishing and business rules remain, but the UK government says it's still possible to have an agreement within a short time. If no deal is done and ratified by December 31st, the UK and the EU could introduce import charges on each other's goods. The EU is warning that without ongoing access to UK waters for its fleets, UK fishermen will no longer have special access to EU markets to sell their goods. But the UK argues that what goes on in its own waters should be under its control as a sovereign country. The UK and the EU are also at odds over the so-called level playing field, which is a set of shared rules and standards to ensure businesses in one country does not have an unfair advantage over their competitors in others. For some, the chances of a deal remains 50-50, and the odds of a no-trade deal exit has risen to 1/3 from 20%. However, in a move that could undermine the talks, the British government will press ahead with draft laws this week that would breach London's earlier divorce treaty with the bloc.
We're still negotiating, and we will keep negotiating for as long as we have available time, or until we get an agreement. We've made it clear that we are close, but there are still a number of important issues where we haven't yet got agreement. If we can get those done, then we've got time to ratify it through the UK Parliament and other parliaments. So as I say, we will keep working until either we run out of time or until we get an agreement nailed down. A deal can be done. I mean, the precision of wording matters here. A deal can be done. There is an opportunity to get a deal that works in the UK national interest, that also works for the EU. The one thing we have learnt from negotiating with the European Union is these negotiations often go to the last minute of the last day, and so it would have been great to have got this nailed down sooner, but ultimately it's not the biggest surprise in the world that it's going right to the last minute.
Now to the coronavirus pandemic, as global cases exceed 67 million and deaths more than 1.5 million. The United States is still the country with the highest number of cases and deaths, standing at more than 14.7 million and more than 282,000 respectively. It's a pretty worrying situation, so much so that the state of California has been placed under strict new lockdown. The new protocols affect around 85% of the state's 40 million people and will be in place for at least 3 weeks, including the Christmas holiday. The new restrictions were triggered by intensive care capacity in hospitals shrinking. The state's governor, Gavin Newsom, has ordered that when capacity at intensive care units in any of 5 regions of the state goes below 15%, the region will go into lockdown within 24 hours. Apart from lasting 3 weeks, the measures continue until ICU capacity goes above 15% again. Until then, all retail stores are expected to remain open only at 20% capacity. Along with outside spaces such as parks and beaches, gatherings have been prohibited and people required to stay at home and contact minimized with other households. Bars, hair salons, and indoor restaurants are closed. In the meantime, U.S. President-elect Joe Biden has nominated California Attorney General Xavier Becerra to serve as Secretary of Health and Human Services. The former congressman will lead the health agency as it struggles to handle a resurgence of the coronavirus, including record infections and a daily death toll that has exceeded 2,000 in recent days. The choice of 62-year-old Becerra, who also had been considered a candidate for other slots, including U.S. Attorney General, comes as pressure intensified on Biden to bring more diversity to his cabinet appointments, including complaints from the Congressional Hispanic Caucus about the lack of Latinos. Let's bring in Channel Television's Washington correspondent, Maria Bird. Maria, great to see you are healthy and well.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course, so let's begin with President-elect Joe Biden's HHS pick. What more do we know about him and what he brings to the Biden administration?
Well, to be very honest, this was a surprise for many. We've watched some of the picks from the Biden administration be very similar to those of the Obama administration. And so this pick right here was one that brought diversity. He will be the first Latino to head up the Health and Human Services Department. He's also a former attorney general, as you mentioned, which was also a surprise, but he has had a long legal fight in the area of healthcare. And so knowing that the work that he's done on the area of healthcare will probably bring much more attention to, I think, the way healthcare is managed in the U.S. They'll probably be bringing to forth, really looking at the Obamacare program that obviously was not a favorite of the presidential Trump administration. But this will bring some real light to some of the legal ramifications around health and human services. So we can see that there will be a different focus just due to this pick being one that I think many were surprised about. But obviously, having been a former congressman, he also probably is very familiar with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
Well, so much of California has been placed under lockdown due to the surge in cases. Are there any other reasons other than the surge in cases, behind this that has resulted in this decision?
Well, the surge in cases obviously was the number one piece. But as Governor Newsom has stated in the past, he's really looking at the number of ICU beds across the state. And so as states and as regions within California reach certain percentages, I believe it's 15% is what he's looking at up to capacity, they will then be going to lockdown. Obviously we cannot see the types of overflooding of hospitals because there's just no space, even in some of the rural communities across the country, to be able to transport individuals from highly populated regions. So it's going to be critical that hospitals are able to effectively and efficiently care for those individuals in ICU units. And so as they see the escalating numbers of individuals hospitalized and heading into the ICU units, that will then spur the lockdowns across California.
Well, across the United States, cases are still on the rise, and President Trump has been so focused on the elections that it seems not much attention has been placed on this. So what are the experts saying would help bring the numbers down, and how badly could things get over there?
Well, California is leading the way. Just as we saw earlier in March and April, California was one of the first states to do a lockdown back then. And so we'll probably begin to see other states doing the same thing. It'll obviously be a test case to see with a lockdown, are we going to see a decline in the number of hospitalizations and the number of cases? We also know that we're battling with the availability of testing, and people are really focused on going and getting tested due to the holiday season when they spend time with loved ones. So they're getting tested at more frequent rates. So that's going to be another challenge that we're faced with, just the frequency of the testing and knowing that many people are asymptomatic. So it's going to be really for the federal government, which we don't see in the next 48 days or so that will happen, for the federal government to take some real harsh measures. But it looks like the states will be the ones taking those measures. Wisconsin has begun to look at some very harsher measures. And so you'll start to see other states across the country doing the same thing.
All right. Well, Maria, thank you so much for joining us today, and please do stay safe out there.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, let's switch over to Pakistan, where we understand coronavirus patients have been dying in hospitals as oxygen supplies run low. Relatives have been describing how they watch loved ones beg for help as panic engulfs the government-run hospital where this is taking place. The officials in the hospital have blamed the oxygen shortage on the supply company, but several staff have been suspended. Pakistan is currently fighting a new wave of coronavirus cases, with a total of more than 400,000 infections and over 8,000 deaths reported since the start of the outbreak. The VOA's Ayaz Gul joins us now from Islamabad. Ayaz, great to speak with you.
Same here, please.
So tell us, how bad is the situation at the Khyber Teaching Hospital?
Until this incident happened, uh, this is what the provincial authorities were telling everybody, that things were really normal and they were taking care of all, this health emergency that has hit this country in February, and that things were under control. But now that the inquiry report has come out, it seems that the entire hospital, which is the largest hospital of the city and in fact in the province, suffered from serious system failures. There was no backup system. Oxygen was not being, due to corruption, supplied properly to the hospital. So there were so many negligences that were identified in the report, that it is quite shocking for the government, for the people, that so many coronavirus patients have been hospitalized and undergoing treatment in this hospital, but then this disruption of oxygen supply caused serious, sufferings for the patients there.
Of course, and you mentioned corruption and things of that nature. So I imagine this report about the oxygen shortage can be a bit embarrassing for the government, but more importantly, people are battling for their lives. Has the situation improved in any way since this report?
Well, what happened today, that there was, the inquiry report was made public, and there was a news conference held by the provincial health minister, and they promised that they will, based on whatever happened, they have not only suspended 7 top officials at the hospital, but they are going to take emergency steps to overcome the shortcomings and whatever problems in the, structural problems, especially in the emergency area of the hospital, will be fixed within few days, and that more action against those responsible for this crisis will be taken. That's what they said today.
Well, you did mention some layoffs of healthcare workers, so let's talk a little bit about the healthcare workers and how this equally impacts them. Do they have the necessary tools to save lives?
Well, it was, that's one good news out of Pakistan, is that when coronavirus hit Pakistan in February this year, the health infrastructure across Pakistan has been in such a bad shape that there were worries that this country is going to see bodies all over the country because of this pandemic. But quickly, under the new government at the federal level, they were able to put together all the tools and, were able to provide supplies to hospitals across Pakistan. And as you know, that China especially sent in so much tools and equipment to help Pakistan deal with this crisis, that is not a situation. It's, again, as I said, the inquiry report found that it was primarily corruption that led to this crisis, and and corruption has been a major issue for Pakistan. But in terms of tools and supplies, things are all in place. But the second wave of coronavirus in Pakistan is really taking a serious toll on people, because the positivity ratio today was 10%, compared to what was in July. It was just 1%. So it shows that the number of cases are really going up, and the authorities, whether they are in this province, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, or elsewhere in Pakistan, are really battling to contain the spread of this pandemic.
Well, Ayaz, thanks so much again for joining us, and please do stay safe out there.
Thank you.
Well, we are learning details on how Iran's top nuclear scientist, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, was killed. According to an officer in the Revolutionary Guard, a satellite-controlled machine gun with artificial intelligence was used to kill him on November 27th. There have been conflicting accounts how he was gunned down as he traveled in a car through the town of Absard. But the Defense Ministry says there was a gunfight between Fakhrizadeh's bodyguards and several gunmen. Other accounts say 3 to 4 individuals said to have been terrorists were killed, and a Nissan pickup truck exploded at the scene. But at Fakhrizadeh's funeral, the head of Iran's Supreme National Security Council says it was actually a remote attack, using special methods and electronic equipment, without providing any more details. Thanks for staying with us. China has slammed the United States' new visa restrictions on Chinese officials, claiming that such moves run counter to the fundamental interests of the Chinese and American people and are doomed to be futile. On Friday, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo announced new visa restrictions on Chinese officials. On the same day, he also announced that the U.S. had terminated 5 cultural exchange programs with China in the latest move targeting cultural exchange activities between the two countries. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Hua Chunying says the country firmly opposed and strongly condemned what she called vicious attacks on the Chinese political system by people like Pompeo and the further restriction on the people-to-people and cultural exchanges between the two countries, claiming that some anti-China forces in the U.S. have stubbornly adhered to the Cold War mentality and attempted to provoke ideological confrontation between the two countries to further undermine Sino-U.S. relations. Ghanaians are winding down on voting today in the presidential and national elections. The two main presidential candidates, current President Nana Akufo-Addo and former President John Mahama, have promised economic recovery following the coronavirus pandemic.
More than 17 million Ghanaians have headed to the polls today, with all eyes focused on the presidential election, as former President John Mahama challenges President Nana Akufo-Addo. Both sides have campaigned on issues of youth unemployment, security, and the effects of coronavirus pandemic on the country's economy. Right before the elections, both sides had signed a peace pact that said that they would be committed to a peaceful election with no violence, and that they would curb supporters from reacting unreasonably, no matter which way the polls go. President Nana Akufo-Addo and John Mahama, both the main challengers amidst 12 others, cast their ballots, and President Akufo-Addo says he's confident of victory.
And my expectation is that the work that the government has done in these 4 years will find favor with the Ghanaian people.
All eyes are on the West African economic powerhouse to see if it can maintain its standing as a bastion of democracy in the unstable region where election disputes this year have fanned fears of a slide back into authoritarianism. Apart from the presidential election, a new parliament is also expected to be elected.
I'm so proud to be a Ghanaian. He's elected my president, the one I want to be the leader for the next 4 years.
Last year, Ghana emerged from a 3-year lending program with the International Monetary Fund, only for the new coronavirus to knock demand for its key exports of oil and cocoa. If re-elected for a second term, the president is promising to push ahead with a $17 billion recovery program to boost jobs, while Mahama's Keystone Pledge is a $10 billion infrastructure plan.
Earlier, my colleague Layo Adegoke spoke to Executive Director of West Africa Network for Peacebuilding, Chukwuemeka Eze, who happens to be in the election situation room, about how the polls have gone so far and what the people want.
I think the good thing is that they have choices to make. It's no longer about just the campaign or the speeches. They have been able to assess the two candidates, the two key candidates, so it gives them choices. However, I must tell you that the ideology, the political ideology amongst the Ghanaian electorate is very huge. So hardly, very rarely will you see an NDC member voting for an NPP member. That will not be possible. So the people they are chasing are the floating voters, or the so-called elites who are not members of any of the political parties. Their members are entrenched, and they will likely never vote for the opposite candidate. But the people they are chasing is these floating candidates, floating electorates. And the good news is that both candidates have been assessed. So it now depends on who have met your expectations, as it were.
Well, it's going to be a Christmas like no other this year, as Pope Francis has canceled the customary laying of wreaths of flowers at the base of a 12-meter column bearing a statue of the Madonna, a traditional ceremony he performs every year to mark the season. The Vatican says Pope Francis would skip the ceremony, which popes have been carrying out on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception since 1953, quote, in order to avoid any risk of contagion caused by gatherings of people. Thousands of people usually line the streets near the area to see the Pope and pray with him. The Vatican said the Pope would instead hold a private service to entrust the city, its people, and the sick around the world to the Madonna. A bride in India knew nothing would be stopping her observing her big day, not even the coronavirus, which he tested positive for. After being tested positive for COVID-19 on the morning of her wedding day yesterday, December 6th, she was sent to the quarantine center heartbroken. But that did not stop her father and the groom from saving the day. The couple tied the nuptial knot decked not in a bridal gown or suit, but personal protection equipment kits at a COVID-19 care center in India's western state of Rajasthan on the day itself. It took place under strict supervision of the medical staff at the center and district administration. The only guests at the wedding were the bride's parents and a priest who were also adorned in PPE. The bride's uncle had tested positive 2 days before the wedding, and when the administration collected samples from the bride and her sister-in-law after contact tracing, they were also found to be positive on the day of the wedding. The families of the bride and groom met the administration, and they decided to go ahead on the date that was fixed with a low-key affair. Well, thanks so much for staying with us. That's all for the program today. I'm Akaite Afia. Have a great evening and stay safe.